May 13, 2008, the Faculty of Architecture building at the Delft University of Technology in the Netherlands suffered a large fire on its upper floors. After burning for more than 7 hours, this happened.
Shit.
The progressive collapse was everything one would expect, localized, asymmetric, and nowhere near freefall acceleration. "10 seconds for 13 stories to partially collapse, yet we're being led to believe a 47-story building can totally collapse in under 7 seconds. The truth is, before 9/11, the term global collapse didn't even exist. Buildings have survived fires, plane crashes, earthquakes, terrorist attacks, botched demolitions, and even nuclear explosions. Never before or after 9/11 have we seen such catastrophic failures."
Building 7's unique structure made it especially vulnerable to collapse that day.
It wasn't built like a typical skyscraper. It was more like a small amphitheater. So the whole lower portion of the building was actually hollow. It didn't have vertical beams going down into bedrock supporting the structure. Instead, it had trusses that had to support the entire upper weight of the building.
The trusses in the building made it very asymmetrical. There were 24 central columns, steel columns. And for those to fail in such a way that that building would collapse in the center first and then come straight down, instead of toppling over, for instance, no.
When Tower 1 collapsed at 10:29 a.m., debris rained down on Building 7.
World Trade Center 7 was damaged severely by the falling debris from the North Tower. Initially, it wasn't known just how badly damaged it was. Some of the photos and other evidence weren't available at the time that the early report was written. But we now know that the falling debris from the North Tower actually scooped out a major portion, the entire south wall of Building 7.
Dr. S. Shyam Sunder would make the claim on behalf of the National Institute of Standards and Technology that on about a third of the face, to the center and to the bottom, approximately 10 stories, about 25% of the depth of the building, was scooped out. Here's the south face of World Trade Center 7. Does it look like 1/4 of the building is gone?
Does look exactly like a controlled demolition.
I understand why people might think that, and I see what they're saying, but when you learn the facts about the way that the building was built and about the way that it supported itself and the damage that was done from the collapsing towers that preceded it, the idea that it was a demolition just holds no water.
Wrong, sir. Wrong.
There was no airplane fuel to feed the fires in Building 7 as there was in the Twin Towers. But Building 7 had something else.
There are a number of diesel fuel tanks throughout that building that were there to run backup generators in the case of an emergency. And one of those generators was fed by a pressurized fuel line from the basement. There's strong evidence that the fires were fed by a line supplying diesel fuel to the floor where the fire was most intense. would take an army of workers. It would take months. You'd have to strip all the sheetrock off the walls. You'd have to run hundreds of miles of wiring all throughout the building in order to wire a building for demolition. So this idea that, you know, some crew dressed in black could sneak in the middle of the night and wire a building like that to be demolished is just, it's absurd.
The largest steel structure we've taken down, which I think is still a Guinness record, is the J.L. Hudson building in Detroit. It took months to design it. It took months to prepare the structure for the placement of the explosive charges. Months. It's noisy. There's just no way to get around it. You go in, you knock out usually all the walls on the floors where you place explosives. Got them.
Then there's the placing of all the hundreds of explosive charges, plus literally miles of initiating cable and miles more detonating cord.
It is such a disruptive process. You're tearing down walls, you're exposing beams, and then you're preparing those beams. You can't just do that in a day. You can't do that overnight. You can't do that with a stealth team of ninjas. You can't do it.
Back in 1977, Citicorp's new corporate headquarters was the latest in the new generation of concrete skyscrapers and a triumph of design. It had a concrete core mixed with a steel frame. But, unknown to anyone, it was an accident waiting to happen. At the time, investigative journalist Jim Dwyer was just a rookie reporter, but his instincts told him to follow a lead.
A friend of mine gave me a tip that he'd heard that the Citicorp Tower, which was the gleaming new skyscraper built in the depth of the Depression of New York in 1970s, had actually been built with a flaw in it that made it susceptible to blowing over in high winds.
Jim learned that two routine oversights might send the Citicorp building crashing. He discovered no one had ever tested the structure to see how well it would resist the loads exerted by high winds at the corners. In those days, building regulations simply didn't require it. Because the tower was braced with diagonal steel beams arranged as V-shaped chevrons, they thought this wasn't a problem, but only if they were strong enough.
If those chevrons were susceptible to being compromised at any point, particularly the weakest point, which is where they were joined, then the building might actually fail.
One of the engineers, Leslie Robertson, had a meeting with the bankers.
He was asked by one of the bankers, he says, "You're not telling us, Mr. Robertson, that this building, this brand new building, is going to fall down, are you?" And he said, "Gentlemen, if the wind blows," and he had a clipboard in his hand and went.
The tests had revealed the Citicorp Tower had a 50% chance of complete collapse in winds more than 70 miles per hour. Typical for hurricanes hitting the East Coast in the autumn.
Generally, the storms come in sort of from the southeast, so I think if we were standing here when a hurricane hit in 1978, if there were one, we would have been okay, but we would have had a tremendous vista of destruction all around us.
The discovery had been made in July, meaning engineers had just weeks before the onset of hurricane season to strengthen the tower. To avoid panic, they had to do this in secret. Night after night, after office workers left the building, the light from welding torches could be seen high above the streets as steel braces were welded onto the chevrons to make the joints strong enough. The near miss showed just how risky building tall can be.